Welcome, fellow mortals, to MJ Pankey Reads podcast. This podcast exists for me to read aloud my books. If you enjoy listening to audiobooks, you can listen along for free. So thank you so much again for your time and attention, and I hope you enjoy the show. We are reading Before Gods today. This work was first published by Brigids Gate Press in the anthology Musings of the Muses. I wrote this during the pandemic, and this was my first completed story. I did not really have the confidence that I needed to finish the novel that I was working on at the time. And several of my friends were writing short stories, and so I decided to give it a shot, and Before Gods is what came of it, and it got published. So that was a super confidence boost, and I'm still really proud of this story 5 years on. So I'm going to read it for you, and I hope that you enjoy it as well. It's cold down there, Crono. They'll freeze. Rhea wrung her hands, her chest tightening as she stared at the hole in the ground, like the mouth of a great monster opening to swallow her children. Rhea, we can't risk them sneaking off in the middle of the night again. It's too dangerous. Rhea shivered, watching helplessly as Crono snatched up their children and fed them one by one into the cavern. First Esta, then Demet, Heri, Hedi, Sidon. Their little faces scrunched up in confusion, as if unsure whether the dark hole was more frightening or their father's mood. Rhea didn't know either. Crono reached for Cess, grabbing the boy under the arms and lifting him so they could see each other eye to eye. Crono's gaze was fierce, yet gentle. This one is going to get me killed. I won't do it again, father, I promise, Cess said, his eyes sharp and resolute. He had only seen 6 migrations, but his determination already rivaled Crono's. No, you won't. Crono lowered him down, then dropped in the mammoth skin they had slept under as a family just yesterday. Rhea knelt, looking one final time into their terrified eyes. Crono squatted beside her, his head bobbing methodically as he counted to make sure all 6 of their children were there. Safe. Satisfied, he relaxed back on his heels and smiled warmly at them. Good night, little ones. 6 pairs of big, wide eyes peered back, echoing calls of good night. Rhea could see they were trying to be brave. Her children had never been separated from her before. Ever. Crono motioned her back, then rolled a giant stone over the opening. The tiny faces disappeared, swallowed up into the earth's gaping jaws. Rhea stifled a gasp, clenching her fists tight, her insides twisting at the sudden emptiness, the cold void that surrounded her instead of her smiling children. Crono turned to her and rubbed her shoulders comfortingly. They'll have each other and the furs for warmth, and there's a stream down there for them to drink from. They'll be safe. Rhea peered around him at the giant rock doubtfully. They don't have me. As if in answer, a muffled cry vibrated up from beneath the earth. Her heart leapt into her throat. She rushed forward, desperate to get to them, but Crono's grip clenched painfully around her arm, stopping her. No, Rhea. His angry tone startled her. She studied the dangerous flicker in his eyes, deciding if she was more afraid of being without her children or of Crono's rage if she fought back. But she knew he wouldn't relent, and the stone was much too heavy for her to move on her own. I don't like this. There must be another way, she said, tears finally pushing over the rims of her eyes. We've considered everything, Rhea. You know there isn't. She trained her gaze on his, grasping for anything to contradict him, but before she could speak, a loud howl broke through the calm dusk. Both instinctively crouched, their eyes darting to locate the danger. Rhea looked again at the giant rock. Could a wild beast? Nothing will be able to move it, Crono assured, as though reading her mind. He tugged on her elbow. Come. Reluctantly, Rhea hurried after him up the rocky slope to the safety of their own cave. a hole in the side of the mountain which was only accessible by scaling down the steep cliffside and shuffling sideways underneath a sharp, protective overhang. It had kept Crono and Rhea safe from wild beasts for many years, and their children too. Rhea had birthed and nursed each baby, watched them grow until they were old enough to climb out on their own to help Crono collect food. Crono and Rhea had thought it was the safest place on Earth. That is, until Sess and Hiri had climbed out one night on their own. A poke to the shoulder coaxed Hiri's eyes open. Sess' brown orbs crinkled at the edges. A big grin spread across his face as he pressed his finger against his lips. Hiri sat up and rubbed the sleep from her eyes. Half of her wanted to flop back down on her warm wolfskin and drift off again. The other half piqued with curiosity and excitement at the bold plan they'd devised earlier. She followed Sess' gaze over the forms of their siblings snuggled together and snoring softly. Their parents, sleeping near the entrance of the cave, made her wriggle from a sudden chill. They would be furious if they woke up. Hiri slinked up into a crouch and nodded at Sess. Whatever the consequences if they were caught, she was sure a few tears and a pouty lip would soften the punishment. It always did. Sess smiled back and took the first tiptoe across the granite floor. Hiri followed, stepping carefully in between Esta and Sidon's feet, around the stack of reeds gathered for a new basket, and over the pile of stones collected to make spear points. Knocking one of those would be the end of their adventure. Obstacles behind them, Hiri glanced back and slowly released the breath she'd been holding. No one in the cave stirred. She shared a triumphant grin with Sess, then peeked over the edge to the wide world. Stars sparkled outside, and light from the moon illuminated the empty plains hundreds of feet below, casting scraggly shadows from the sparse trees. Sess reached around the left side of the cave opening and grasped the first rock hold. Another chill raced down her spine as a new thought struck her. How much noise did climbing make? She hadn't paid attention before. The morning climb was always one of excitement and bustle. But now? Hiri flinched as Sess swung away and began to climb out of sight, sending a few grains of sand skittering downward. Hiri glanced nervously at their parents to make sure they were still asleep, before carefully following her little brother's path out and up. The plan to sneak out and get a real look at the world had seemed so exciting this morning, but as she climbed in the cold dark, placing her hands and feet by sheer memory, anxiety threatened to chase her back down to her warm wolfskin. Hiri! The dark silhouette of Sess' face against the backdrop of a billion stars erased all doubts she had of returning. Sess grabbed her arm and helped her up onto the flat plateau at the top of their mountain. Hiri was stunned at the beautiful world before her. She had never seen the whole night sky from outside the cave. She felt unsteady looking at it, disoriented, mesmerized, swallowed by it, awed by how powerful she felt suspended between earth and sky. Sess interlaced his fingers with hers and gave her a gentle squeeze, bringing her awareness to the earth where the crickets chirped. His breathing was fast and steady beside her. One sparkle straight above dislodged from its place and sped across the sky, leaving a bright trail behind it. Hiri gasped and squeezed Sess back. "Come on!" She tugged him further away from the edge to stretch out on the ground. Snuggling into the crook of his arm, she pointed and giggled as more stars soared across the sky. "I can't believe Father and Mother never let us see this before," Sess whispered, hugging her close. "It's so beautiful." "Look at that one," Hiri whispered, shooting her hand up at a long streak that trailed almost to the edge of the earth. Sess' fingers clamped suddenly around her shoulder, jolting her out of her joy. "Hiri," he hissed. A rebuke was on her tongue, but Sess' shiver beneath her hand stopped her short. The crickets weren't chirping anymore. They sat up. A shuffling noise flooded Hiri's senses. Every muscle suddenly tensed. Something was coming from the winding path down the side of the mountain in front of them. A rock dislodged and plummeted down the slope. Sess grasped Hiri's arm as he scrambled to his feet, pulling her up with him. They hurried over to the ledge to begin their descent back to the safety of the cave, but they didn't reach it before the shoulders of a monstrous beast rose above the plateau's edge in front of them. A large, razor-laden paw stamped onto the flat earth. "Hiri, come on!" Sess tugged at her wrist, but she was frozen in place. A snarling snout and gleaming green eyes appeared, set onto a large, bristly head with spiked ears. Saliva dripped from fangs longer than her arm. Droplets glittered in the moonlight and made tiny mud cakes where they fell. "Hiri!" The great creature growled at her, flexing its claws out and scarring the ground. Its jaws opened and turned to the heavens, releasing an earth-shaking roar. Hiri felt the warm wet down her legs. Paralysis gripped her, squeezing a whimper from her lungs. Sess scrambled behind her as the beast reared back, tensing to pounce. A stone sailed over Hiri's shoulder, lifting a strand of her hair. It hit the monster in the eye. A high-pitched shriek of anger and pain resounded from its throat. It stepped back down the path and shook its head, roared again. Sess threw another stone, a larger one. It hit the beast in the shoulder. Another shriek. "Hiri, climb!" Sess hurled another rock. The creature lunged, half-blinded. Its paw swiped through the air. The moonlit claws painted an arc across the sky. Sess leapt back, narrowly dodging the attack. Something heavy rammed against Hiri from behind, knocking her feet out from under her. She pitched forward and caught herself on her hands. Dust plumed up into her eyes and mouth. She spit and shook her head, eyes burning, skin crawling in anticipation of unseen claws ripping her to shreds. Another shriek from the monster was met by a loud, thunderous cry, a new beast of prey on the scene. Cronu. Hiri flipped over. Cronu's feet were wide before the monster, his long spear raised in one hand and his club in the other. Their mother appeared beside him, club in hand, panting from her frenzied climb. The monster roared and lunged for Cronu. Its jaws clamped around Cronu's spear and snapped the shaft like a twig. Weapons and arms descended in a blur of strikes. Yells and shrieks blared. Blood splattered on the loose dirt. The monster shouldered its way out from between her parents and pounced closer to Sess. Its long, thick tail swung, knocking Rhea off balance. Cronu lunged at it with a loud cry, swinging his club at its head. The monster whipped around, crashing its rump into Rhea and slinging her across the plateau, nearly over the edge. Paws slashed at Cronu, who dodged the fatal blows but twisted his foot on a stone and stumbled. The beast leapt, opening its jaws to devour her father's whole head. Hiri screamed and covered her face. There was a startled yelp, unexpectedly non-human. Hiri lowered her hands from her eyes. Sess stood over their father. His arm was inside the beast's mouth all the way to his spindly elbow. Wicked fangs pressed up against Sess' torso. Blood gushed onto Cronu and Sess's legs. Had it eaten Sess' arm? Why had everything suddenly stopped? The monster slumped to the earth, sliding off Sess' arm to reveal the broken spear point in his hand. For a moment, everything was still and quiet. Then Cronu kicked the dead beast away and stood. Blood dripped from his body and pooled on the ground. He glanced at their mother, then at Hiri. The look in his eyes sapped every shred of relief that they had survived this. Their father grasped Sess by the neck and threw him down, growling in rage. Sess yelped, crawling in retreat toward Hiri. He grasped her hand, renewed fear shaking them both. "Cronu! No!" Cronu's finger raised to their mother, commanding her silence, then pointed at Sess and Hiri. You will be the death of me, of all of us. This cannot stand. This cannot go unpunished. Hiri squeezed Sess' hand, remembering their earlier joy under the brilliant stars. "But father, I killed it." "You will not challenge me," Cronu bellowed. Hiri wrapped her arms around Sess. Even in the face of Cronu's rage and disappointment, she wasn't sorry. The joyless eyes of her children as they crawled out of the pit sharpened the ache in Rhea's chest. One by one they emerged and trudged toward the basket of fruits and cooked meat. The seasons had cycled twice since the incident. What was supposed to be a temporary punishment had turned into something Cronu became increasingly reluctant to end, despite Rhea and the children's constant pleas. "They haven't learned their lesson yet," he said at first. As time went on, "Predators are migrating now, let's wait." More recently, "Keeping them down there protects us too." Though his words made some sense, Rhea began to notice a change in the children that made her heart heavy. They had grown taller, but thinner. Their muscles were withered and their shoulders hunched. In the gathering dusk, they appeared even more ghastly than usual. A new realization struck her. They're dying. Cronos scanned the landscape for wild beasts, barely noticing that his children were even there. He's killing them. Cronu. He continued to watch for danger, as though he hadn't heard her. She grasped his hand in a sudden burst of desperation and anger, digging her nails into his palm. "Crono!" He wrenched his hand away and pulled her back, his features pinching together in a scowl. "What?" "We can't make them go back down there. Look at them." "No." Defiance swelled within her. "Crono!" "They go back!" The loud bellow stirred a few nesting crows to flight from the cliff above them. Crono's chest heaved angrily as he leaned toward her. She stayed silent, and he waved his hand dismissively at the children. "Hurry up and eat and get back down there. The Vagadons will be coming out soon." He turned back to his watch, clenching his club with white knuckles. Indignant rage and resentment heated her body. The loving father she had trusted with the well-being of their children. Could he be so blind to the harm he was causing them? The real threat isn't a beast, it's you. Guilt and grief knotted inside of her. She clenched her jaw, biting back tears that threatened to consume her. If she let even one fall, she would crumple to the ground. Ray's sight lighted on Cess, the last to climb out of the pit. His shriveled muscles were tensed, his eyes bright and alert. The other children sat sullen around the baskets of food, but Cess had a defiant spirit that was not broken, a true leader. A wistful smile tugged at her lips. Crono had been like him once. Crono. He hadn't seen their youngest child yet. Maybe. She caught Cess' gaze and flicked her chin to the large boulders at the base of the mountain. Confusion creased Cess' forehead for just a moment before he bolted into a soft-footed sprint to hide. She watched until he was out of sight. She could save one child today. Tomorrow, she would save them all. Somehow. She turned back around and froze. Hiri was watching them, a piece of meat dangling in her hand on its way to her open mouth. Ray waited for her daughter to alert Crono, but she returned to eating like nothing had happened. Renewed confidence surged within Ray. Crono no longer understood what was needed to protect their children, and Hiri knew it too. She examined the faces of her other children, catching the dark looks they tossed at their father's back. They all knew it. Do they feel the same about me? She suddenly felt sick. How could they not? What had she done to protect them from this monster? "Enough. Get back inside." Crono's gruff voice made Ray jump. The children shuffled to their feet and trudged back, sliding one by one down the throat of their slow, devouring doom. Crono's gaze followed them from where he stood watch, head bobbing methodically as he counted. He frowned. "Where is Cess?" Ray swallowed down her panic and leaned over the opening. "He's already down there, Crono." There was a pause, and for a moment she thought he would trust her, but then she heard his footsteps approaching. The children looked around for Cess, confused looks passing between them. Crono was almost beside her. Her attention darted to the dark corner of the sleeping area where an elongated boulder sat. Hiri followed her gaze and strode forward, grabbing her wolfskin from the ground and throwing it over the boulder. She knelt beside it, firing a warning glare at her bewildered siblings to keep silent. Crono reached Ray and squatted beside her. His hot breath raised the bumps on her shoulder as he peered down. Terror and excitement danced wildly through Ray's veins as she extended a long finger. "He's over there." His eyes narrowed. "Where?" "Right here, Father. Don't you see him?" Hiri interjected, rubbing her hand over the fur-covered boulder with soothing strokes. She inclined her head toward the rock. "What's that, Cess?" "Oh, he says he's unwell. There, Cess, just rest. I'll make sure Sidon leaves you something to eat." Crono didn't move for a long time. No one did except for Hiri, who still smoothed her bony hand lovingly over the stone. Ray swallowed, too afraid to look at Crono to see if he believed them. Could he hear her pounding heart? Finally, Crono stood and nodded to Hiri. "Take care of him, daughter." He braced himself against the great stone to shut them in. Ray released her breath, smiling down at Hiri. They'd done it. "Father." Ray and Crono both whirled around. There stood Cess. Panic fluttered in Ray's chest. Beads of sweat ran down Cess' torso, as though he'd been running all this time. His hand was hiding something behind his back. Ray glimpsed the tip of Crono's broken spear point. He'd been to the mountain cave. "Cess!" Crono's surprised face crumpled into a beastly scowl. He pushed himself off the boulder and charged toward his youngest son. "You will never learn your lesson." Crono stretched out his hand to grab Cess and throw him into the pit. Cess ducked left, lunged forward, plunged his weapon into Crono's side and wrenched it free in 3 fluid movements. Ray watched, petrified as Crono stumbled, grasping the wound in pain and shock. Was it enough? Crono's eyes raised to Cess. Rhea's blood froze in her veins. She recognized that look. She had seen it when the beast had cornered Cess and Hiri on the plateau. A predator had come to devour their family, and Crono was going to kill it. Crono lurched forward, capturing Cess by the neck and raising him up with a monstrous growl. Cess dangled and kicked, driving the knife down into Crono's arm, but his blows merely glanced off the hard sinews. Crono slapped the knife away with his other hand, sending it flying through the air. It landed near Rhea. "Crono, no!" Rhea screamed. Crono ignored her, gnashing his teeth and squeezing even harder. Cess began to choke. She grabbed the broken spearhead and buried it in Crono's belly, driving downward through the flesh. Bowels and blood spilled onto the dirt, slipping into the pit with a sickening splatter. Screams resounded hauntingly from below. Crono dropped Cess in a heap and slumped onto the ground, gasping, choking, convulsing. His bloodshot eyes locked onto Rhea as they froze over in death. Rhea dropped to her knees beside Cess and gathered him in her arms. She held him tight as he coughed and spluttered, sobbing against her. "Shh, you're safe now. You're all safe. Come out, children. You're free." Sidon emerged first from the belly of the earth, crawling through the viscera of Crono with wide, disbelieving eyes. Next came Hiri, then Hiri, who went immediately to Cess and threw her arms around him, then Demet, and lastly Esta. Rhea's children huddled around her, crying and sobbing. She hugged and kissed each one, stretching out her arms and pulling them all close. Their expressions weren't visible through her tears, but she could feel their warmth surrounding her. They were alive. They were free. "You're safe now, my darlings. You're safe." The idea for this story first came to me, I don't even remember when, but I started seeing similarities between myths of different cultures around the world. For example, there are countless numbers of cultures that have a flood story. For example, nearly all of them have a creation story of some kind. Some of them have, all of them have heroes, obviously, of people who have done, amazing things and legendary things and have received gifts from the gods and whatnot. And a lot of them are very similar. And so I started to think, what if these stories, actually happened in real life? And the reason why all these cultures have a version is because these are stories that came from the first group of people that were kind of all together, before people disseminated into different tribes and scattered all over the world. Maybe some of these myths are from our original ancestors, and just through the telephone game and, how things get passed along orally, details change and names change and circumstances get tweaked a little bit, but at the core there's that original story, that truthful story that's there. And so I started to think about that and tried to imagine what would that story of Cronos and Rhea and Cronos eating his children, the original Greek myth, he eats his children and then Rhea gives him a stone to eat, disguised instead of Zeus. And Cronos eats the stone. He just swallows it without even really looking at it because he's so used to it by now because he's already swallowed all those other children. And so he just swallows it without thinking. But Rhea hid Zeus away. And so Zeus grows up and then, there's a couple of different versions in the myth where he either forces Cronos to eat something that makes him throw up his siblings, or he, cuts him open and they all come out of his stomach. So there's a couple of different versions. I think the most commonly accepted one is that Cronos throws them all up. And so I started to think, how in the world could that story have derived from something that actually happened? And that's where I started to imagine this prehistoric family living in the caves, and they have found this cave that they are, they feel safe in. But there's something obviously happens to where Cronos believes that Zeus is going to get them all killed, or that he's going to be the death of him specifically. And then of course, what's up with the swallowing thing? Like, how does he eat his children? How did that verbiage, how did that part of the story get so distorted to where he, in ancient Greece times and in the Bronze Age, and when those stories were written down, how did that become he physically ate his children? So those are the things that kind of went through my head, and that's how this story was derived. And some of the other elements that I added in, I had added them in to set up further stories of myths that I believed, could have happened in our very distant past. And like, what are the true pieces of those things that might have actually happened that just got distorted and, changed over time as the stories were passed from generation to generation. So there are a few Easter eggs in here of things that could become other stories in this same vein. I have not devoted a lot of time to it because I ended up getting all the confidence I needed to finish my first full-length novel and publish that. And I've also published a second book in the series, and I have a children's book coming out as well. And so like all of those things have kind of, consumed my attention, among other things. And I haven't gotten back around to this, but this idea still lives in my head. And I would definitely love to continue writing stories about this and exploring these myths in ways that are possible to have actually happened in prehistory. So anyways, I hope that you have enjoyed this reading. It's not perfect by any means, so I hope you'll forgive the little hiccups here and there in the audio, but I also hope that you've enjoyed it. If you have, please tell your friends, share, and get the word out. And I will be reading more of my own works in future episodes. So please subscribe if you want to hear me read more and talk about more of why I'm writing Greek myth or whatever. I mean, this is a brand new podcast. I'm not exactly sure where this is going to go. I have lots of ideas of things that I would love to talk about on my podcast and discuss. I have a lot of ideas for inviting special guests and things on to have discussions. So we'll just see what happens. We'll see what happens. And I hope you will join me for the journey. And if you would like to support me in this podcast or in my writing, you can join my Ko-Fi page, or you can buy me a coffee on my Ko-Fi page, and follow me on my website and all my socials and all of that other stuff if you'd like. So yeah, thank you so much, and I will see you next time, mortals. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of MJ Pankey Reads. May the Muses inspire you always.